The following program is produced by People to People Ministries, a faith based humanitarian not for profit organization. In this program, you will hear encouraging messages with principles for your everyday life. Your host is Dr. Carl Parker, founding director, speaker, and retired educator. An audio version of this program and more information about People to People Ministries can also be found online at peopletopeopleministries.com.
Hello and welcome to Reflections. I'm your host, Carl Parker, and I'm delighted that you've joined us today. Our topic is about forgiveness. Have you ever had someone to do something or say something that really hurt you? What did you do? Did you forgive them? Sometimes forgiving someone can be hard to do. What do you think of this? Today, I have decided to forgive you, not because you have acknowledged the pain you caused me, nor have you apologized for it. I forgive you because it gives my soul peace. Forgiving you does not change the past or the pain, but it allows me to focus more on the future. Psychologists generally define forgiveness as a conscious, deliberate decision to release feelings of resentment or vengeance toward a person or group who has harmed you, regardless of whether they actually deserve your forgiveness or not. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting, nor does it mean condoning or excusing offenses. It is simply choosing to let go of negative emotions for an offense or something that is illegal or immoral. Forgiving someone is intentional, it's voluntary. When we forgive someone, instant healing doesn't come, especially when the hurt causes deep emotional wounds. But we can choose to be intentional in the healing process. You may not even realize how bad you feel until you decide to forgive. Studies have shown that being a forgiving person not only leads to healthier relationships, but also lowers blood pressure, betters one's heart health, and even builds a stronger immune system. There are negative consequences of not forgiving, holding it in. Studies have shown that it can lead to emotional pain of anger, hate, hurt, resentment, bitterness, and so on. And as a consequence, can create health issues, affect relationships, and stop us from experiencing the peace and freedom that forgiveness enables. Robert Mueller, the assistant or former assistant secretary general of the United Nations, once said in one of his poems, decide to forgive, for resentment is negative. Resentment is poisonous. Resentment diminishes and devours the self. Be the first to forgive, to smile, and take the first step, and you will see happiness bloom on the face of your human brother or sister. Be always the first. Do not wait for others to forgive. For by forgiving, you become the master of fate, the fashioner of life, a doer of miracles. To forgive is the highest, most beautiful form of love. In return, you will receive untold peace and happiness. Now that sounds good. Author Marianne Williamson, she stated this. She said, forgiveness is not always easy. At times, it feels more pain than the wound we suffered. To forgive the one that is inflicted, hmm, let's pause. I'm going to go back to author Marianne Williamson, and you can splice it and put it together, okay? Author Marianne Williamson has stated that forgiveness is not always easy. At times, it feels more painful than the wound we suffered to forgive the one that inflicted it. And yet, there is no peace without forgiveness. According to physicist and software engineer Frank Hiley, forgiving is difficult because the human consciousness has a hard time living in the present. He goes on to say that with language intertwined in the human consciousness, we use it as a time machine to roam in our memories. And when we think about a past that haunts us or the way we felt hurt by someone's words or actions, it causes us to latch onto those moments. As a result, we get stuck and find it hard to move on. The more we think about the past, the stronger the attachment, and thus forgiveness is put off like an unfulfilled chore. What about anger? When you're angry, the emotion can be so strong and binding that forgiveness will be the last thing on your mind. But more often than not, we may choose to be angry about a situation because it feels right to us. As a result, anger is used as a false sense of empowerment to justify the way we refuse to approach the problem directly. Many things we hold onto is a mere distraction from the real problems we're observing. Think of fear. Sometimes we are afraid, the fear of getting hurt again, afraid the same behaviors or actions repeating and don't want them to be repeated again. We don't want to be disappointed again by these behaviors and actions occurring once more in our lives. And as a result, you end up shutting yourself away, which doesn't leave you any room to forgive. This defense mechanism may have been developed over time to protect yourself from getting hurt again. Or perhaps you're the one who is scared to ask for forgiveness because you fear letting others down again. Regardless of where you stand in the situation, your mind may be going through some preconceived notions based on past experiences. You may believe that the person who offended you deserves punishment. When you hold a grudge against someone, it may be your attempt at punishing them. This is how you gain a sense of control and power after feeling hurt or victimized. But sometimes that punishment can be ineffective, especially if the person isn't aware that they have offended you. In reality, you may be carrying the heavy burden of a grudge while the other person is moving on with their life. You may feel misunderstood and find it hard to trust or let the offensive party in. You may find it easier to justify your decision to hold on to that resentment. After all, why should you forgive the other person when they didn't treat you well? But this only causes the both of you to build your walls higher. And as a result, you're not only avoiding each other, but rather the problems you've chosen not to address and work with directly. Have you ever considered the biggest reason that blocks you from forgiving people? Is forgiving people, or should we say, is forgiveness really necessary? Well, in most cases, it is. It's necessary because forgiveness is healthy and it's needed and recommended. Sometimes, however, there's more power in not forgiving. In most cases, forgiveness is healthy and is needed and recommended. Sometimes there's more power in not forgiving, but learning from encounters rather than growing and moving on. Rose Cox, she says, forgiveness is more for you than the person who hurt you. The release of the hurt when you can forgive is so overwhelming and powerful. It doesn't necessarily mean that you allow that person back into your life. It just means you release them from the power of hurt they have over you. Jill Newsom, she says, forgiveness is worth the price, is priceless, in fact, and yet it is handled so flippantly. She says, so casually. It has the ability to mend relationships, friendships, restore trust, bind relationships, and yet some refuse to give it away. That is forgiveness. And what if we forgive and do it more freely? Would more relationships, friendships be healed? Would more misunderstandings be resolved? Would trust once again be restored and bind a broken relationship? God gave forgiveness to us to give away, not to hoard. Starting from a young age, we're taught to forgive. We're taught to forgive people because it is the right thing to do. And even though it may be the right thing to do, it can still be the most difficult. What I'd like to do is just take a break and share with you some information about People to People Ministries. Welcome back to Reflections. The Bible has illustrations about forgiveness, and I want to share 3 illustrations that I think you would appreciate. The first one, and probably the most well-known, is the prodigal son. And you'll find it in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. It's a story of a young man, the youngest of 2 brothers, and he asked his father for his inheritance. He wanted it early so he could leave home and enjoy what he says or considers enjoying life. He goes and he squanders all of his money, and he has no friends and no money, because money has a way of bringing friends into your life, but not true friends. But because of his poor choices, he's now left in great need. And when he realizes his mistake, he humbles himself and goes back to his father. He plans to beg that his father will take him back as a servant. Instead, his father welcomes him home as a son. This story illustrates that we are a part of God's family, and he loves us and he forgives us, and we can thank him for that. But this is not a free pass to do whatever we want to do, whenever we want to do it. But instead, it should be a great motivation to do what is right in every situation. When we make bad choices, we are still part of God's family. He still loves us. And just like parents do not leave their children just because they do something wrong, God does not abandon us because we do things wrong. When we realize our mistakes, ask him for forgiveness, he is always ready to love us and welcome us home. Another story is the story of Joseph. This is a special story, and it's found in Genesis chapters 37 to 45. Joseph was one of 12 brothers, 12 boys, but his older brothers really had a problem with him, and they sold him into slavery, and he ended up in Egypt and ended up being bought by Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. After being falsely accused by Pharaoh's wife, Joseph ends up in prison. He is known for interpreting dreams, and one day interpreted the Pharaoh's dream. And the Pharaoh made him second ruler over the land of Egypt. The food supply was not good in the land where Jacob lived, and he sent his sons to Egypt to purchase the necessary items for the family. Well, Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. And after a series of events, and you can read all about this in Genesis chapters 37 to 45, Joseph reveals to his brothers who he is. I can imagine how afraid they must have been. They had sold him into slavery, and as a result, he ends up falsely accused and then goes to prison. And now here he is, second in command in Egypt. And they must have really thought that he was going to take revenge on them. He could have had them put to death for what they had done to him. But listen to this. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Does my father still live? But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, please come near me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years, the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by great deliverance. So now, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh and Lord of all his house and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Aren't you amazed at Joseph's attitude? What a wonderful example God has given us in this story of forgiveness. I mean, think what you would have done, or if I would have done, and they sold us into slavery, and then we spent time in jail and prison, and then ultimately we become second in command, maybe vice governor or vice mayor or whatever, but we are second in command, and our relatives who sold us into slavery comes to us begging for food. Would we have the spirit to forgive them? The last story I want to share with you is that of Jesus. You can find this story in Luke 23, chapter 23. And it says that when they came to the place where they crucified him, and the criminals, one on the right and one on the left, and Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Can you imagine Jesus being innocent of the claims of the Jews? And as a result, though, they chose to have him crucified with criminals. And Jesus, even in his dying breath, says, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Sometimes you and I are like that. We do things contrary to the will of God because we don't know really what we're doing. But we can thank God for Jesus who forgives us. Jesus is the reason we can be forgiven, and he is the reason we can also forgive others. We can thank the Lord for that. When we come to him and admit our need for his forgiveness, he responds to us with outstretched arms because Jesus, of his example, we know how to respond to others. We love and forgive because he first loved and forgave us. 1 John 4:19. I want to close with a prayer and ask God to be with us, to help us to be more considerate of how we relate to others, that we don't put ourselves in a position where we have to have people forgive us, but that should we offend, that we can ask for forgiveness, and that when people offend us, we can forgive them. So I offer this prayer on our behalf. Heavenly Father, I thank you so much for Jesus, for Joseph, for these stories, for the prodigal son story, for all of these stories of forgiveness, and there are so many more. And I just ask that you would give us the spirit of forgiveness. And if I, and perhaps those who are listening and viewing this program, if we have done harm to someone, I pray that you will forgive us and that they will forgive us. And we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you for being with us today. I hope you join us again next time, because until then, peace and grace be with you.